You are leading on this side. Okay, the essence is actually not to put any of us on the spot. I observed while sitting there, the whole place was looking gloomy, we're too serious, expectation, what do they have, what is going to happen, and I felt I need to drop something to just make us loosen up. We are not in a classroom, it's just for us to share knowledge and interact at the end of the day for the ultimate benefit of our industries, as well as the environment that affects all of us. And for the institutions also, you can hear professor, associate professor, engineer come in, because IEE RECP methodologies and anything around it, they are largely nonsense to us. Like I always say, it's not as if those that study engineering or sciences may have had, some sort of exposure to some of the concepts indirectly or directly. But in this form that is being deployed, it's largely nonsense to us. So I want to encourage us to participate effectively. And please, dispassionately raise questions during the interactive session. What I mean by that is there is no question that is wrong, there's no question that is right. Raise questions and ask questions. Finally, my assignment this morning, before I hand over the microphone to the facilitator, is to conduct an assessment. I wanted to bypass it because I was seeing just about 7 or 8 hands saying they've had exposure to the technical training that we've been having on this project. And that's touched my mind somehow, maybe the church mind, that maybe I should skip the assessment. But after consulting with the team, since it's part of the parameter yardstick set by UNIDO for us, because at the end of the program, for those that are aware already, there's going to be certification. And UNIDO, we include the name of those participants, whether you're a staff of industry, whether you're an expert from institution, include them in the pool of experts of UNIDO that have been exposed to this. So should they have any project, they have anything to do within the West African sub-region, they can tap into that pool and invite you to be part of the process and all of that. So we felt the fact that Manufacturing Association of Nigeria is the one hosting the project management unit, and we are dealing with members. And when you say members, you know what I mean, starting from our local associations. So UNIDO in its wisdom developed something like a yardstick. Very simple questions to assess so that we can use that as a basis of selecting, because it's not going to involve everybody. Those that will be certified also, we also have exposure to ISO 50001. And that, for those that have done ISO, if you have run ISO in your system before, there are some payments you need to make in dollars on behalf of such persons. You are not to pay, UNIDO will pay. So they want us to have a yardstick, a basis just for sifting. From the questions, they are not difficult, they are simple questions. And if you don't want to write, you are at liberty not to. But if you want to, why not? Just take them. They are purely objectives. With opportunity, like my in-laws, we always say, opportunity to do tumbo. If you don't know the real answer. So, institution, we just decided to include you this time around because the financing component, the funding component of the project is domiciled with Bank of Industry. They are the ones, more like financier, they are the ones supporting to ensure that we do that. In fact, they have a well-structured division or department that is looking at things that has to do with renewable energy. The essence of this is to have somebody in-house in industry also from the accounts sector, because if you say you are preparing business plan or anything, a proposal to your bank to say I need this, I need that, after the cleaner production assessment has been conducted, you also need, as an engineer or person in charge of maintenance, you need the account division to help you put some figures together around the cash flow, around other things. So we felt it's not all about engineers or technicians. Let's also bring you in. So that's the reason why you are here. So why I'm saying this is, if you have an accountant or from the finance unit of your organization, and it's that reason we included you in this program, and you don't want to write, you are at liberty. It's actually not for you. Do we have any question? If we don't have, I would like to call on one of our national experts to please distribute the assessment. One. You can distribute IEE first, or which one is that?
There is a finance element to this, and when you were introducing yourself, there are people from bank or industry. Any finance question that you have that I can't answer, you direct it to the bankers. The final reason that I was excited is because we have professors in our midst, and there is business planning here. Any business planning question that you have that I can't answer, we'll direct it to the professor. Very interactive class. So this isn't a one-man show. In fact, in order for it not to be a one-man show, we have class. You would have to bear with me because apparently we do not have a clicker, so I'll be walking back and forth to move the slides. Finally, before we get into it, two quick things. Some of us don't know where the washroom is. Just go right outside and turn to your left, you see the washroom or the restroom or the toilet. That's where it is. The other thing is that we're here for a great time. Because we'll be having table groups and we'll be having those sessions. So please, if you can mix up, I would appreciate that. But if you don't want to, by myself, I'll start moving people around. So what's the agenda? First, we'll start off by setting the context. I understand that there were people that were not here about 18 months ago when we came around. And so what I'll do is to do a quick run through of what we learned in the past so that we level the playing field.
Please, I can't see it down here, so you should take it up a little.
We've got 2 days. We'll be running through this over the course of 2 days. Day 1 will be a lot more theoretical. I'm particularly excited about it too. But like I said, we'll start off today by trying to level the playing field, teach ourselves, a lot of people that were not here the last time, we'll try to introduce to them what we learned the last time. And then very quickly, we'll move away from there. And remember, the title of this session is Business Planning and Corporate Strategy. And you'll see, from the first slide that this is phase 2, meaning that we have done phase 1 before. And so once we're done leveling the playing field, we'll get quickly into how to make the business case for RECP or IEE projects. I find a lot of times that people go to management, people with fantastic RECP ideas or RECP project ideas, they go to management but can't seem to crack the code. Before even going to bankers, like management would either say this is a waste of money, I don't see the value in this, we can jack up prices instead, etc. So we'll learn today how to make the business case for this project. And then once we learn how to make the business case for the project, we'll then quickly look at the architecture of a business plan. Because when you go to those folks in DOI, you will not just walk to them and demand money. They typically have certain documents that they require, and one of those documents is a business plan. So we'll look at the framework of what makes a good business plan. People who write all sorts of business plans. I've seen a ton of business plans. What we'll try to do today is to say what makes a winning, but not just a winning, a bankable, implementable business plan. And so when we learn that framework and the architecture, we'll then go to tomorrow. Tomorrow, like I said, is the part that I am most excited about. What we'll do tomorrow is to practicalize or put into practice what we've learned today. So we will sit here tomorrow and walk step by step and write a business plan. Now, you can't write a business plan in one day. What we try to do is to at least get our hands dirty a bit. If we say that there's a problem statement, can we together write up a problem statement? If we say there's something called a solution statement, can we together try to write up a solution statement? And because we'll be in table groups, I want to see the group that will win. Because it will be competition tomorrow. In fact, I'll not wear suit tomorrow. It's fire for fire. So please come prepared, come ready tomorrow. Tomorrow really is when we would, practicalize the things that we're going to learn today. When we come back in, I believe it's September or much later in the year, we will talk about finance. One of the things I like about this group is that it's so diverse and it's intentionally diverse. We've got engineers in the room, we've got finance people in the room, we've got bankers in the room. And you'll see in a minute why we made it intentional, like we designed it that way. Before now, what you'd have is you get a group of engineers together in the room and train them. And then you get bankers together in the room and train them separately. And you get the finance folks in the room together separately and you train them. And constantly we find that the outputs that we ultimately get is disjointed. Because the engineer is thinking one way, the banker is thinking another way, the finance folks are thinking in a separate direction. And what we've decided to do this time is to bring everybody together so that we can learn the same language, and so that by the time we're building our business plan or by the time we're ready to implement our projects, everybody's on the same page. All right, so in this particular mission, the first thing we'll learn is, we'll try to remind ourselves what RECP and IEE projects are and what kind of value they bring to the business. And then secondly, we'll try to translate those project ideas into compelling business cases. When we come back, we'll get into the world of financial metrics, like all that jargon that the bankers, all the financial terms that they used to speak, that we say we don't understand. What's debt service coverage ratio? What's net profit margin? What is, free cash flow to firm, free cash flow to equity, all those things. Or sometimes you go and meet the banker and you say you need 10 million. And for some weird reason, they say you only qualify for 5 million. What do they mean by qualify for 5 million? We'll learn all of those when we come back. Such that by the time we learn those things, next time you go to the bank and you ask for money, you will be certain that the thing that you ask for is the amount that they will give you. Because you now know the secret sauce into what they used to say about you only qualify for. Because there's a way the bankers calculate these things for them to determine what you qualify for. I'm going to let the secret out of the cat out of the bag. All their secrets, we're going to reveal it when we come back for mission 2. All right, so this was what I said for you, because what I have on the board is I just want to quickly run through introducing myself to you. Studied agricultural economics. I always like this part because people then say, how did you get into finance or RECP? Here's the story. I wanted to study pharmacy, but I'm not as smart as most people in this room. So they looked at me and looked at my course, at my score, and they said, you don't look like someone that is very smart. So it is agriculture from pharmacy. It is agriculture that you should go and learn. The way that I compensate myself or I speak myself up is to say, well, pharmacists, they save lives. Farmers too, by giving us food, they save lives. So it's not too far apart. I'm also saving lives. The truth though is that ever since I got out of school, I've neither practiced as an agriculturist or as an economist. So it's left to be seen whether I still save lives. We'll see today. And then after that, I worked in PwC Nigeria for a bit. From there, went to PwC Qatar, worked there for a bit. And then from PwC, I went to business school in Canada. From there, I joined a bank in Canada. I was doing environmental and social risk management for a bit. And then I currently work at a pension fund in Canada. We've got $140 billion in asset management. And what I do there is that I bridge the gap between the sustainability folks, because what usually happens, like I was saying earlier, is that people speak all this sustainability, climate change, blah, 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 blah. And then there's the other guys on the other end who are the finance folks that say, we don't understand this climate change thing. What are you talking about? And the climate change guys say, we don't understand this finance thing and controls and audit and all those things that you talk about. Well, I'm fortunate that I'm multilingual because I can speak both sustainability and finance. And actually, I can speak audit as well. You can see on the board, I can also speak a bit of risk management. So that's what I do currently at the pension fund. I bridge the gap between the sustainability and the finance things, and as well the audit program. Okay, so let's get started. Context setting. So let's remind ourselves of what we learned 2 years ago. For some, it will be a reminder. For others, it would be leveling the playing field. I'm sure one of you would already say, but why didn't you just show us this thing before we wrote our test? Because everything I'm just going to show now, it's the same thing that you just did in test or in the assessment. Well, again, we know that there are certain finance people in the room, so it's a great way to just teach them some of these things. So what's resource efficiency? Like we keep saying RECP, RECP, RECP. What's RECP? RECP has 4 words. So it's resource, efficiency, and cleaner production. Because I'm not a very smart person, I like to break things down. So RE is resource efficiency, meaning that there's resources that we've got to use efficiently. But what resources? Are we saying money? Are we saying time? What sort of resources are we talking about? When we say resources in this context, we're talking about things like energy, water, raw materials. And so we're saying that we have to find a way to use these materials in a cost-effective manner. That's the resource efficiency part of the RECP. Then there's the other end called cleaner production, right? And that's simple enough English, even me that I don't know too much English. I know that cleaner production sounds like we can produce in 2 ways. We can produce in a way that is dirty, and we can produce in a way that is clean. This cleaner production one looks to me like it is saying that we should use our resources effectively and efficiently in a way that will translate to producing in a clean manner. The other thing that is important to mention, and this is a critical piece, is that most times when we talk about cleaner production, people think that we're just talking about the output, the end result is where we should be focusing because we're saying production. But this is not just end of pipe treatment. We're saying right from the input end of the flow, we should be thinking about how to produce cleanly. It's why you will notice that resource efficiency and cleaner production are married together. All right, so then there's the IEE element, industrial energy efficiency. It looks to me, because most of us here are from industry, that energy is a major, critical input to our production. And so what we're saying is that the energy that we use in our industries, we can use it in an efficient manner. That's what industrial energy efficiency means. There's a lot of English on the board, but I'm trying to get us away from the big grammar there to say, let's break it down. Again, like I said, the reason why I like to break things down, unlike most people here who are very technical and smart people, is that I'm not as technically adept as you people. So I try to break things down to their components. So when we say industrial energy efficiency, like I said, I can read out reducing energy consumption per unit of output through better technology. No, we're just saying that there are technologies today that can help us utilize this energy that is a critical component of our production in an efficient and effective manner. Of course, I've given a few sector examples, and what I try to do is to take all the 5 sectors that are represented today. I'll just pick one. So when we say RECP and IE, which one is a good example I can use? So let's say textile, for example. Textile uses, there's dyeing involved, but there's also a lot of water usage. Is there a way that we can use the water, maybe recycle the water, maybe reuse the water that we use for cleaning and washing the fabric? Is there a way to ensure that rather than using 100 liters, maybe 100 liters would use for maybe 10 years? Permit me to just use that example. But is there a way to use the same 100 liters for maybe 50 years? RECP and IE is focused on. Some people like us to throw jargon around, so I can do that as well. So if you don't remember anything, you can remember these 3 things: reuse, recycle, and what? And reduce. See, there's professor in this. So reduce, recycle, and reduce. They even say it's more than, professor says it's more than 3. There's recovery in there. All right, so but what are the key drivers of RECP and IE? Amongst the many drivers, I think these 4 personally are the most important. I don't need to explain this to anyone. That number one, that the prices of diesel and raw materials are going up, right? So, when I was in Lagos, I was making the joke that the only thing that defies the law of gravity, at least in Nigeria, is the price of raw material. The law of gravity says whatever goes up will come down. But with prices in Nigeria, whatever goes up continues to go. Okay. Whatever goes up doesn't come down in this Nigeria. It feels like whatever goes up just keeps trending up. And because prices of goods, of diesel, of electricity, of raw materials keep climbing up, we've got to think about a way to use the same resources, in a cost-effective manner. That's one of the key drivers of REC. That's why this thing is important. The other thing is that there are just environmental regulations that are popping up right, left, and center. And those regulations sometimes are environmental in nature, and so you want to comply with those regulations. If you don't comply, they'll come and knock your door and give you either fines or penalties. Sometimes they'll even shut the entire factory up. We don't want our factories to be shut off. We want to keep producing. That's another reason why this is important. The third reason, and I think that this one is interesting, is that for some of us, we export our goods out of Nigeria. There are laws and regulations outside Nigeria now that compels you to produce in a green manner. The example I like to go to is this thing called the EU Carbon Adjustment Mechanism. What that thing is saying is just a big word for what that thing is saying is that in Europe today, they say we want to reduce our emissions. But we know that we import a lot of goods into the country, into the continent. So what we will do is to say that if there's any good or any product that if it was produced in Europe, it will produce a certain level of emissions. But if it is produced outside, it will generate more emissions. The difference between those emissions will tax it. Now, what's happening is that the people who are buying products in Europe are then looking for people that are producing outside, but in a way that is green, so that they will not be subject to that tax. And so if I was buying from my auntie before, and our production has a lot of emissions, but then I can go to my auntie there, and our own production has lower emissions, what do you think I'll start going to now? I'll start going to her. And so that opens up new markets for you. And so what I'm saying is that another reason why this is important is that it can help to open up new markets for us. And then finally is this opportunity for green finance. This one is even evident in the room, in that if you go to a commercial bank today and you say you want to borrow money, the rate is like what now? 30%, 30 to 40%, 35%. Some people say you're even lucky at 30%. But think about it, there's BOI in this room that is willing to give you loan for what? For 10%? That's a third of what you would ordinarily get from a commercial bank. And all we are saying is that just show us the evidence that you are aligned with RECP and IEE. So imagine that you're able to borrow money at a third of what you would ordinarily borrow for. In my opinion, that's a key driver for why you should start considering IEE and RECP. By the way, all of these things we said the last time, so don't forget, we're still at the introductory phase where we're trying to level the playing field. All right, I won't take too much time on this. We're just saying that, remember that we said resources are what are important. The resources is a big part of RECP. And we said that these resources that we're talking about is energy, it's water, and electricity. So I've just put up a few stats here to help you drive home the point on the gap that currently exists. According to the World Bank, 90 million Nigerians are currently off-grid. They do not have access to electricity, so they have to generate their own power. I'm sure every one of us in this room know people that do not have access. Me, I've gone to the village a few times. I know that my grandma does not have access to electricity. I served in Zamfara, in a town called Gusau. Gumi, I beg your pardon, Gusau is the capital. I went to Gumi, there is no pipe on water, there is no electricity. I almost jump out from Google during my service here. 60 million Nigerians without access to pipe-on water. There's 2 million estimated tons of solid waste produced by Nigerians annually. So there's no need for us to repeat this. We know that there are resource challenges in the country. But where challenge abounds, opportunity also abounds. And so the Nigerian government came up with something called the Sustainable Finance Roadmap, and they've identified a few places where the opportunities abound. Energy, not surprisingly, is a place where there's opportunity. Water, agriculture and forestry. All of this, what this slide is saying is that, make no mistake, there are resource challenges, but also make no mistake, there are opportunities within the ecosystem. All right. In 2022, I think, Nigeria came up with something called the Energy Transition Plan. Here's the plan. It said, well, we put out number one, let's look at what industries or what sectors produce the most emissions. When we look at which ones produce the most emissions, let's come up with a plan to help to reduce those emissions. So they landed on 5. I think there was McKinsey involved, the federal government was involved, the office of the vice president actually was involved, and we landed on 5 main sectors that are the key drivers of emissions in the country. Power, transport, oil and gas, cooking and industry. Industry, you people inside this place, industry. We're the ones responsible for a lot of emissions. We're responsible for 65% of the emissions in Nigeria. What I did was to now take the bank statement, not the bank statement, the annual reports of the top 5 banks in Nigeria. And I dug into the sectoral analysis, meaning most of the banks, if you truly read their financial statement, they will tell you what industries they lend money to the most. So I tried to look at it, say which of the industries do they give money to the most. And guess what? It's the same industries that we say produce the most emissions that bankers give the most money to. And the federal government has written a fancy plan that we want to reduce emissions in this industry. And so on the left, on my right hand, what you see are the sectors that produce the most emissions. On my right hand is the chart that I put together by looking into the banks, into the financial statement of banks, and you see oil and gas, manufacturing and industry, power, energy and utilities. Those are the same industries. Now, my point isn't that we shouldn't give money to these sectors. That's not my point. My point is that as we deploy capital, and this is to the bankers, as we deploy capital towards this sector, we have to start thinking about the impact of the money we are giving to them on the emissions and the plan that the government has. So if an oil and gas company walks into the door and says they need money, are we asking them questions like, what RECP and IE practices do you have in place? Or is this money going towards, reducing the use of resources, efficiently using resources, or is it going to be business as usual? So how is $10 billion what we need? And what our friends here have put up is 15 billion naira, 10 billion naira. Yeah, like professor is like naira, And so what this is saying is that even though banks are beginning to wake up to the challenge, because you bear me witness that almost every single bank now has maybe a renewable energy desk, or has one of those energy or resource related desks now. But we're saying that it's still not enough. Like there's a lot more work to be done. Let me digress a bit. These same banks, I don't know if you saw their annual reports this year. They're just calling 1 trillion profits, 1.3 trillion profits. I don't have a problem with them calling 1 trillion profit because we are all business people and we want to keep making profits every year. Right? So it's not a problem that the banks are making a lot of profits. The disconnect that I find is how are the banks making this much money? But it looks like the industry and every other sector is not making as much money. We'll talk about that one later. So my point is that we can start taking this our 1 trillion naira profits and start deploying it back to people like ourselves in this room. It wouldn't make those profits go down. If anything, it just expands their profitability in a sense. What I did was to say that, well, beyond commercial banks, government agencies too, have said, listen, we know that the pool or the pot from the commercial bank is not enough. Let's start thinking about how to deploy capital towards this space. So you've got our friends from DOI, and this is just one of the many products that they have. We've got something called the Solar Energy Fund. If you look at their website, you see that it's 6 billion naira. But that's one of many things that they do. The CBN also through PFIs, so participating financial institutions, they've got something called on-lending facilities. So for example, within agriculture, they've got this thing called CACS, Commercial Agricultural Credit Scheme. And what they do is to say that we'll give, because we're a central bank, we don't lend directly to individuals or to businesses. We'll create a pool of funds, give it to banks, and those banks will in turn lend it to businesses like yourselves. And that's the idea of what an on-lending facility is. And they've got the Development Bank of Nigeria, so they at least wrote their own in dollars, man. They wrote $1.3 billion. But that 1.3 billion is not for 1 year. It's the entire pot. All right, so what I've noticed is that, yes.
I'm just looking at the figures. This amount, I know, knowing that this is a national thing, we have the rich sector. I'm looking at, even from my own organization, what is 5 billion? It's not going to do nothing to us. So if this is what they have, probably this, accounts for why we are yet not feeling the impact of this program. My thought.
These banks have gone into business for one reason and one reason alone. It's to make profit, right? Lend to businesses like ourselves, get interest income from that, and return capital to their shareholders. If the banks can make money from anything other than green finance, why should they give money to green finance? Right. What I think needs to happen, and that's what I was just getting at, is that there's got to be a strategic approach and not a tactical approach towards solving this issue. At the company level, we have to think about what's important to us. How does this thing fit into our strategy? I'm sure all of you can bear me witness that there are times where you go to management and you say, oh, I found this fancy project that we can do, this is what it will cost, blah, 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 blah. And they will say no. They will say no to it because until you are able to translate these values to value, nobody will take you seriously, right? The problem with green finance and with sustainability-related projects or with REC projects is that we always come at it from an environmental perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that because we need to go and collect money from people, that person can take that money and put it in FGN bonds, will not take any risk, because what's the worst that will happen? The federal government will go, it will print currency and pay. So why should I take any risk on your project when I can get free money by putting my money in FGN bonds? My point is that until we start framing these projects as values and profitability-driven projects, we will keep being stuck where we are. That's at a company level. At the bank level, the banks have to realize that you can only make so much money from FX gains. So if you look at the financial statement of a lot of the banks, a number of a sizable part of their profits came from something called trading gains and foreign exchange gains. Well, it's because Naira and dollar were dancing Lugumba last year and 2 years ago. So there was an opportunity for the banks to make that much money. But is there a way for us to think more strategically as banks, right? To say that we've done retail lending, we've done corporate lending, what else can we do? What sort of products can we create again that will be hot on the market today and would attract even more profit to us? And that's when they got to start thinking about green finance and RECP and IEE related projects. The other reason, by the way, why banks have any pot for this green finance at all is because a lot of them have external shareholders, so foreign shareholders. These foreign shareholders have green finance goals, and so they're the ones putting pressure on the banks to at least create a product so that they, in their abroad, can meet their own goals. Ordinarily, why should we care? Like, why should they care? They're in business to make money. The third part is this system level, which is the government. The government that has created this fancy-looking document, what are they doing? To try to create an enabling environment for the banks. Because if you say you want to do green projects, green finance project, and you go to the bank and it's still 30-something% you will get, what's the point? Right? So it's things like what BOI is doing today now, like saying, we'll give you this loan at 10%, would encourage you to start looking at this space, say, okay, maybe we can do RECP, maybe we can do IE, and we know that we'll get funding at a cheap level. So it's those three layers, and that's what I put on the board there. Is for companies, there's resource-related issues, right? But there are technologies out there that can use to solve those issues. For the banks, well, because companies need money for this, maybe there's an opportunity for new products. For the government and at the system level, maybe there's an opportunity for us to create the right enabling environment and put in place policies. But beyond policies, because in Nigeria, sometimes it's not the lack of policy, it's the political will to effect those policies that's a challenge. I remember when I was doing agricultural economics, it was the Fadama years. There was the Fadama project. Fancy looking policy documents, everything solid. But when the money got deployed to buy seeds, and not just seeds, to put in place irrigation systems, not just irrigation systems, to put in place fertilizers, everything appropriately done, everything appropriately documented in this policy. All they thought about it so much, they thought about beyond farmers. They said, okay, well, farmers have complained that even when this irrigation system is available, herdsmen will come into the farms and then eat the crops. They sat the herdsmen down and said, well, we are even willing to create grazing land for you. Everything well thought out. Federal government deployed disbursed money. From federal government to farmer, imagine that they disbursed 5 naira. Okay, very good. So, I have read the energy transition plan. Fantastic work. Obviously, as someone who is slightly technical, there are enhancement opportunities within the plan. But forget the enhancement opportunities. Even the plan as it is today, I think is great. I think that if you can try to implement it, it's great. But what have we done since 2022 till now? To put things in perspective, I did a bit of research. We need $10 billion annually. I checked in 2024 and I wrote a paper on it. The amount that we've deployed to our budget, so that 2024 budget was when I did the research. The amount that we allocated to infrastructure is $800 million. So I'm saying even if we take all the budget allocated to infrastructure, we still have to go and find 9 billion to solve climate change. And I promise you, we will not deploy the $800 million to climate change. So how can we have a $10 billion plan per year, but our budget has deployed less than $1 billion towards infrastructure, and about 30% of the budget is going to debt service. So we need to think of proper policy tools. But I am not the president of the Federal Republic. So I'll try to move away gradually from this conversation. and focus it on what we're doing today. If you want to read my paper, I'll send it to you. All right, so what framework can we put in place for getting, so for assessing financing opportunities? For the financial institutions, you've got to think about it from the portfolio perspective. I'm touching on it now. Think about it from the portfolio perspective. Think about what further products you can put in place. From the companies, you've got to think about it not only from a project perspective, but from a company-wide strategic perspective. And think about the tactical, and then that will then form the tactical, project that you will do. By the time you marry both of those together, strategy plus tactics will lead to what? Unlocked capital. Again, this is all just refresher from the last time. This is the last slide on the refresher. And so where we landed at last time was, well, there are different ways or different financing tools that you can access. Everything from stuff really cheap, like grants, meaning that this is my daddy right there, that says, we will make more than 15 billion in a month in our company. You can decide that they don't know what to do with the 15 billion this month, and they can give out grants. That's free money, it's cheap. They just need you to meet certain, you might just say, well, you must ensure that this is the amount of kilowatts per hour that you use, this is the amount that you have to spend. Once you can meet those, I'll dash out money. It goes from grants into something really expensive like equity, where someone like me who likes money will say that I will invest in your company. It's not debt. I'll invest in your company, and I'll be taking out dividend every year. In the middle is then the world of debt, right? Whether it's corporate debt, meaning that you go to the bank gives you money. Corporate debt is something called a recourse debt. What that means is that if you come and borrow money from the bank can lay claim to any part of your assets because it is the company that has borrowed money. Then there's something called non-recourse debt, which is project finance. For that, you're saying that it is this project that I want to borrow money for, such that if the project goes underwater, the only thing the bank has access to is the project or the assets of the project. You cannot touch any other part of your business. Sometimes it's called asset financing, project finance. All right. Everything we just said now is introduction, is refresher. Now we'll get into the meat of this mission, which is how do you build a business case, a corporate strategy for RECP projects? Like you were saying, sir, it looks like there isn't enough funds. There's limited funds deployed to this. So if we say that, well, this is where we're at today, the funds are limited. How do I stand out my own company, and how will my company access or get access to this finance? You remember from the refresher that we said there are 4 key drivers of RECP. The first one is that cost is rising, whether it's diesel, whether it's electricity or raw materials. I want to stay here for a second. Every time that a company, maybe the CEO calls CFO and says, listen, our margins are 10%. What's happening? And the CEO, for example, imagine that the CEO puts a constraint on the CFO and says, we cannot jack up prices now, the customers will not pay etc. Let's go and look for efficiencies, let's go and look for cost efficiencies. More often than not, what happens is that the CFO will do like this and say, the way to increase this margin is that we need to, there's 50 million naira opportunity here. If I take out 50 million expense, our margin would increase. The chief technical officer's salary is 50 million. That's 2 divided by 4. Like if you remove chief technical officer from this company, that 50 million will suddenly open up and the margin will go up and the CEO will be happy. I find that every time we talk about cost efficiency, more often than not, it's our people that we want to let go of. And this is not even a Nigerian problem. This is globally. Microsoft let go of what 3,000 people last week or 2 weeks ago. Go and check Facebook, go and check Goldman Sachs, go and check the biggest names. Whenever, go and check Amazon, thank you, man. Like check all the big names. Whenever we're thinking about cost efficiencies, the first place we go is staff cost. But here's the challenge. You tell the chief technical officer that's collecting the 50 million that, well, your services are no longer needed. Because in your mind, there's this junior staff where it looks sharp. The work that the chief technical officer is only just even approving things. He's just approving. It's not like he's really doing anything material like that. This boy is the one that is sharp, that does the heavy lifting. He can do the work. What now happens is that the reason you had a chief technical officer in the first place will now open up when you tell the CTO to go. The problem though is, well, when things start scattering because you've let your staff go, you will now say that, oh, I need to go and look for another CTO. But here's the problem. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So by the time you go and look for a new CTO, now we say no money is 75 million naira. So that margin that you were trying to protect before will now be further eroded. Not only will it be further eroded, the problem that our junior staff has caused, not because they are not smart, but because you are telling them to do stuff that's beyond their experience and their knowledge. It's not their fault. It's just an experience and knowledge gap. That new CTO will now first have to clear that problem first before now starting his own work. And by the time he sees that, 6 months into it, he will say, he will either do one of two things. He will say, you people's problem is too much, and carry his bag and meow. Or he will come to you and say, now that I've made a bit of progress, see that 75 million is not enough again. You should review my salary upwards. Margin, what has happened to margin again? The CFO will now look again and say, okay, maybe CTO is not the problem. I found one engineer whose money is such and such. Let's go and tell that engineer to go. It gets so bad at some point we say, maybe we don't even need receptionists in this office. Let's tell the receptionist to people can just simply walk in. People are nodding their heads because this is true. This is stuff that I've seen happen in practice. Why did I say all of this? I think that perhaps there's a better way to think about cost efficiencies. That maybe there's an opportunity to not fire the people that are supposedly our best and CEOs when they come out during, what's it called, annual general meeting. When they want to say anything about staff, I promise you go and listen to any CEO talking about staff. They will say this, they will ensure they infuse this thing. Our people are our greatest assets. This greatest asset though, when things happen, maybe you need to improve margin. How can your greatest asset be the first one to go? It's interesting, right? But you can't blame people because if you're a CFO and your Oga has called you and has compelled you to go and enhance margin, and then there's a limitation that's been placed on you, and that limitation is that, listen, we cannot increase prices because there is an affordability issue at the moment in the country. If we push up prices, we'll push it up to a point where nobody will buy, and we'll lose customers, and we don't want to lose customers. So the CFO, who is a finance-driven person, will open up the books, and all they will do is go and look for the place where, they'll do the mathematics and say, where can we enhance margins? And because textbook answer says cost-cutting projects start with staff, that's where they will go. Again, I say all of this to say that there's a better way, or at least there's another way that we can try. And this other way we can try is this using resources efficiently. Right. And so what does RECP do? So let's give ourselves an example. A Is there a world where we've noticed that diesel cost is the most expensive, one of the biggest things that we spend on? Is there a world where, and this is just an example, if we transform to solar, there's an upfront cost, of course, that will be here today, but on an ongoing basis, maybe we'll be able to halve our diesel cost. Because, well, let's be factual, with solar, yes, big challenge with renewable energy. Renewable energy resources are intermittent. What that means in simple English is that if you do solar, the sun does not shine all day long. And so at some point, it will be dark, and so you'll not be able to extract enough energy from the sun. This is what makes the solar energy technology slightly difficult. Not just solar energy technology, but most of the renewable energy technology, is that you always need storage. And storage is battery. And the technology today doesn't have, I mean, they begin to work on something called long duration storage, LDLs, or long duration batteries. How much solar as well would you install, for a industrial size, factory? And so this problem of intermittence makes solar expensive. And so most likely what you will do is a hybrid solution where during the day maybe we'll use solar, and then at night we'll revert back to diesel. But at least what that means is that you've been able to halve your diesel use, because all of a sudden there is a solution, or at least there's a technology that can help you reduce cost. Someone obviously will say, but hold on, Odu, I hear everything you're saying, but there's upfront cost that's associated with that. We'll get to the point where, and don't forget, we don't have to use our money, we can go to BOI, or to go to BOI, we must be able to make a business case. That's what we're learning today. So step one is one of the major reasons why, one of the major reasons of why RECP and IE projects and to drive the business case is that we can lower our production costs. That lowering of production costs without sending our people away will help to lead to improved margins. Right. The other one that we've spoken about is environmental compliance. For me, it goes even beyond penalties. Like, penalties is one thing, right? Like, imagine that one of the regulatory agencies come and say that you should dispose your waste one type of way, you should not dispose it that type of way, they slap a fine or a penalty on you. You can take that fine, pay it, and move on. But a bigger cost in my mind is the reputational risk. Do you want to be the company, maybe you're in the food and beverage industry, do you want to be the company that Business Day puts on their front page is using contaminated water to produce the food that you are selling? Do you want to be the company that this day puts on their front page that isn't meeting up with regulatory compliance? Like, imagine that you were sweet sensation, I don't know if you guys, Mr. Biggs. So maybe we all eat from Mr. Biggs. This afternoon, we now hear that, guys, the water that Mr. Biggs they use is not good. They use dirty water for their production, and they've been slapped a fine of 100 million. I promise you that for you, the biggest worry in your head is not the 100 million fine as a customer. For you, it is that Mr. Biggs will not see my leg there. And so, beyond the fines, for me, it is the reputational risk that is attaching to not meeting environmental compliance that is the bigger cost. Because it will lead to lower revenue, lower margins, and ultimately the potential for bankruptcy. I don't have a local example, no local example is popping in my head at the moment, but there's a company that we invested in my pension fund, we invested it into this company in London. This is the Hydro company, right? This is the water company in London. It's called London Hydro. And what has happened is that they've got sewage pipes corroded and have not been replaced for a long time. There was an audit that was performed, and they found out, this came to light. that the sewage pipes have been corrosive. They've not replaced them. Maintenance has not happened in a long time. And the news came out. What then happened is that they turned back to investors to say, hey, investors, can you provide us capital to solve this issue? What we said was, well, yeah, we need to provide capital to solve the issue, but this means that we're taking money from our pocket today to give to you. What sort of returns are you going to give to us if we deploy this capital to you? What ultimately happened was that, well, they looked at it and said, well, it's only by increasing the water rate, that we are able to refund money to you. Now, don't forget that water is a regulated entity. So government said, no, you cannot, ratepayers cannot pay more money. Long story short is that my investment company carried our kaya and said we are no longer green. The other investors at the table carried their kaya and said they are no longer. But what that means is, what that translated to for us, because this was then invested for us, that's lost money. That's pensioners' money that we could have returned to them that has now gone down the drain. Right? Beyond that, look at the health impact on the people living in that city. Now the government is having to look for new investors. The government is having to cop out money. And that money that the government will cop out is taxpayers' money. I'm saying all of this to say that when you think about environmental compliance, you might think about it as that one thing you don't really need to worry about, because for you it is, excuse me, I'm producing my goods, I'm selling anyway, it's not a big deal. But I promise you, if it ever comes to light that you're not meeting this, the requirements, the regulatory requirements, what you will pay will be more than the fine. What you will pay, you can pay for it in lost customers, lost revenues, you can pay for it in trust. In fact, I've seen companies, there's a company called Northvolt, the same thing happened. They paid for it in bankruptcy. Right. So that's the second reason. So like, if you want to think about building your business case beyond lowered margins, another way to build a business case is through environmental compliance. And don't just frame it as environmental compliance. Frame it the way I'm framing it from a reputational risk perspective. We talked about like there's this growing demand today for green supply chain. So, I had spoken earlier about EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. If you are a company who says, well, we want to expand our businesses beyond Nigeria, we want to look outside, I promise you, the regulatory requirements, the Nigerian one, we are not meeting it. It's the one outside we want to go and try and meet. There's an opportunity to expand your businesses outside, beyond just outside Nigeria, even into new user bases, new customer bases, because of the growing demand for green products. So one way to make your argument, for example, is that we found an opportunity where someone told me before I flew out of Nigeria, I had a colleague who said he's going back to India for his wedding. And we're just chatting about how much weddings cost now. And apparently, in certain parts of the world, there's something called a green wedding. And they're able to charge a premium, because what we'll say is that, we'll use reusable paper, would use, everything, the design, the decoration, everything will comply with, green requirements. And this guy said they're charging 30% above cost, like above the usual price that you charge for most people.